This episode is a special encore presentation of Work Trends. Welcome to the Work Trends podcast, brought to you by Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan M. Bureau. Every week, I interview smart people reimagining the world of work. Be sure to stay current with all of our interesting podcasts by visiting our page at Talent Culture Work Trends on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And of course, you can listen at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome everyone to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast. In today's episode, we're talking about introverts. Now, if you've been listening to my podcast, you know that I'm an extrovert and an introvert. I'm a little bit of both. You know, someone who's never met a stranger, I have a little bit of that. But I have to tell you, in researching this topic with my team, we uncovered some very interesting data about people who are pure introverts. And again, there's a wide range. So I want to hear from each and every one of you. Where do you fit in this range? I bet many people don't know that people like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, they are self-proclaimed introverts. So when you consider the business savvy and success these people have amassed, I mean, they've obviously used their introversion as a tool to build their careers, and they did it successfully. They capitalized on their ability to listen well, to stay objective, and to find the answers in chaos when other people might just huff and walk away. So for everybody out there who's listening to this podcast, if you have preconceived notions about introverts being awkward, being outliers, make sure you continue listening, because you're about to learn a whole lot more about what introverts are really about. I know I'm excited to learn more about this topic, but before we get into the Q&A, let me tell you just a little bit about today's guest. Jennifer Kahnweiler, PhD, is an author, certified speaking professional, and one of the top global leadership speakers on introverts. She helps organizations harness the power of introverts. She's got a cool new book, by the way. Guess what it's called? Creating Introvert-Friendly Workplaces: How to Unleash Everyone's Talent and Performance. Her previous best-selling books include The Introverted Leader, Quiet Influence, and The Genius of Opposites. Her books have been translated into, get this, 18 languages. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fortune, you name it. Thanks for being here today, Jennifer.
Oh, Megan, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You got it. And now, where are you today?
I am in where I've been a lot these days, in Atlanta, Georgia, where I've lived for many years.
Now, do you have a lady cave by any chance?
Do I have a lady cave? Oh, yeah. Actually, I just even fixed mine up a little more than it was to get away from my husband.
See, I have one of those too. And that's where I've been living underground for 6 months.
It helps as long as you have a place to stand and sit and you can get all your points on your watch. Yeah.
Wear my pajamas, you name it. Well, listen, as someone who is, I'm a unique blend of extrovert and introvert. And those who know me well know this. It's a blend. The topic of learning more about introverts is super interesting to me. So tell me, what fascinates you about introverts, and how have you drawn inspiration to write your 4th series on introverts at work?
Right. I mean, to write books and continue with a topic, you do have to be motivated, as you know, Megan. And so many years ago, when I was doing leadership classes, leadership development classes, I kept getting drawn to those people who were the quieter folks in the room. And I kept seeing that in organizations. I worked in a lot of positions in HR and leadership development and coaching. And it was just a consistent theme that they were frustrated. They were overlooked, ignored, and in so many different ways. And that was a lot in technology. I was working with engineers and IT folks. And the other thing was, they were very receptive to the sort of skills that I was sharing with them about interpersonal and communication skills. And so I knew that once they would learn kind of the temperament theme that I learned early on in my work as a counselor and as a coach about introversion and extroversion, looking at that through that lens, that could be very useful. So I started sharing that and got incredible reception. And that's the professional story. marry. And, we're always motivated, right, personally, I believe. And so I've been married a long time to the guy in the man cave right now, to a total, very strong introvert. And until I knew that, we had a lot of, disconnects until I understood about those differences in temperament that he needed that time to decompress. And so I knew how much it helped me personally. And that's why I became kind of almost a zealot in the workplace about this.
Yeah. So listen, when you were researching your latest book on how included and valued introverts feel in the workplace, what were some key findings?
Well, I started out actually just as a quick preface from, there wasn't much about this. I mean, I Googled introvert-friendly workplaces because I had written a lot about introverted leadership and influence and, how do we get along interpersonally? But I couldn't find anything, Megan, about how culture is adapting and adjusting to be more inclusive, and since that conversation was so prevalent right now and has been over the last few years of diversity and inclusion, I was really kind of surprised. And so I couldn't find anything. So, of course, when you can't find anything, you write about it, right? And so I did a survey, and that was my first kind of blush into this, or the first step into that area. And I got a lot of responses, as I do whenever I bring the question up, particularly with introverted folks, about, what are you feeling? What's working for you? What isn't? And the survey that was my first indication that I needed to go further with this. And some of the things that I found were like on the positive side, that actually this was pre-COVID, that many companies, in fact, 60% of them were actually starting to use more remote work in their design of jobs. And people, of course, introverts were very positive about that there were opportunities too to have more one-on-one conversations, more flexibility in open space offices where introverts could get time away from people all the time. So there were some real positives that I found, and I decided to pursue that and learn more about best practices. On the negative side, I got more than in the stats that I totaled, or the percentages, it was the comments. And this is true in all the programs that, we run on our virtual programs. There's so much passion around the frustration. I get interrupted all the time. I mean, there was like constant, a whole lineup of concerns about how extroverts weren't. Everything was designed with people who were the talkers to get the loudest voice in the room, and that's who was heard. And again, around the promotions and opportunities, and big bone of contention, a huge bone of contention was meetings that, introverts didn't feel that they were heard there. In fact, one figure, and this was almost 200 introverts that responded to that first survey, they said that their organization actually demonstrates a willingness to hire and promote introverts. And I think I wrote a piece for I did, for Talent Culture about some of the ideas that we can put in play there.
Well, you absolutely did. And we love having your voice on the blog, by the way. Now, let's take a short break to get an update from our advertiser, First Up. Your employees face a constant barrage of information throughout their day. 120 messages on average, in fact. That's a lot of triggers for rising burnout and plummeting productivity. So what can businesses do to break through the noise and actually connect with employees? The solution lies in delivering a smarter employee experience with First Up. First Up is the world's first and only intelligent communication platform. By activating employee and behavioral data across systems, First Up transforms the way companies engage with their employees during the moments that matter most, from hire to retire and everything in between. With hundreds of pre-built templates, First Up empowers communication and HR teams to deliver hyper-personalized employee journeys at scale in a matter of minutes, so that everyone, from your desktop staff to your frontline workers, has the resources they need right at their fingertips. Over 500 organizations around the world, including 40 of the Fortune 100, rely on First Up to build stronger, more productive workforces with 65% higher retention, no more missed opportunities or engagement efforts falling through the cracks. Don't let your employee experience fade into the background noise. Instead, transform it into the backbone of your organization with First Up. Visit firstup.io today to learn more. Now back to the podcast and our special guest, Jennifer Kahnweiler, PhD, author, and speaker. So, what are the major differences between an introvert and an extrovert these days, as opposed to, say, maybe 2 years ago? Is that changing at all? Is it the same?
Isn't it interesting how people are coming up with all kinds of ways to look at it? And it's changed for me, actually, Megan. I mean, I started 12 years ago writing about this, and I was a little more, I don't want to say the word rigid. I don't like to see myself that way, but I kind of went more strictly with what Carl Jung said. And I still basically believe that. And from what I hear from certainly anecdotal data and other, that, introverts really are, it's all about energy. They're energized by taking quiet time. And that's where the magic happens. I think one of your guests a few times ago said that's where, I love that word magic too, because taking quiet time allows for the creativity to flow, innovation, deep reflection, which is a real strength of introverts. And so that's the real differentiator. And when you ask people, must you have time to decompress after being out there and being out in the world and being stimulated? Introverts will say absolutely yes. And extroverts will say, or people that, are sort of like both, like you mentioned, they'll say, yeah, it's nice to have. I kind of like doing yoga. I like meditating. It's good. And that's true for me, I find too, but they can go longer. In other words, it's like a battery. Their battery lasts longer being out in the world. And that's where actually extroverts get energized. So it's about that's another term that comes up a lot, stimulation. Like how much stimulation can you take? And, introverts really can't take as much. And by the way, it is a spectrum.
It sure is. It's not A or B. It's everything. It's all of the alphabet. I totally agree. Because I'm not one way or the other. I'm a true blend of both. And it depends on where you're at in your life. Like I was far more of an extrovert, say 10 years ago. Whereas now it's a 50-50. I need my yoga. I need my downtime. I need my hiking. If you follow me on Instagram, yeah, I'm loving living here in the Pacific Northwest because we're, living in a global pandemic right now too. But I love just getting out into the woods at this point and just getting away from it all and thinking.
Yeah. And I think that also comes from the original definition too, where Carl Jung talked about the second half of life. He said we step more into the other side of ourselves. And I think you get more comfortable with who you are and you don't need people around all the time. So I would totally agree with you. It's their developmental influences, their cultural influences is what your family, gave you reinforcement for or not. So you start to step more into who you are as you get older.
So given the current state of how people are working remotely, how are introverts responding right now to remote work? What are you seeing out there?
Well, if you've heard of the expression both and, right? It's been very interesting to watch this evolution. I think if you asked me that question 10 months ago, it would have been a little different. Introverts tend to really like that. They've always liked, in general, I'm generalizing, that remote work where you have the chance to focus, get your work done, have autonomy, and simply not have people stopping by saying, would you like to go for some coffee? And then feeling badly that you're not going and all this kind of stuff. So introverts do like it. However, this is not a normal situation in any sense of the word. And so there are so many people that have, as we know, tremendous competing forces with kids home, their spouses home, limited Wi-Fi. I mean, we don't have to go into all of the frustrations there. And there are also frustrations around certainly meeting, because we've got, what we're learning now on the positive side is that we have choices in how we meet. Do we even need to meet? But I think we went like Zoom crazy in the beginning, And so introverts are extremely exhausted, particularly with the pressure to put your camera on all the time. Yeah, so there's advantages. And a lot will tell you they're pleased that their companies are staying home, but we're also hearing, of course, feedback from both introverts and extroverts that we're missing out on the collaboration and the socialization that's extemporaneous.
Well, in my opinion, it takes a diverse group of people to really make a workplace culture just that, right? A culture. In regards to introverts, what would you say are the 2 to 3, say, most important steps that people can take to get the best out of introverts? How do we communicate with them? How do we engage? How do we retain? How do we get real? I mean, any and all of the above.
Well, Lexi, and we got, how much time do we have?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, really. It starts here's where it starts. It starts with self-reflection. Okay. So how well do I know myself? Like you talked about the fact that you think you're both. And so once we know ourselves, then we can step out and understand other people, right? So I think that's really key. Self-reflection is number one. Leading by listening. I think we're hearing that now, particularly, right? Building trust virtually is really key. And so understanding what introverts are going through, how people like to be communicated with, asking people that question. And again, introverts certainly fall into that. I think related to our own self-reflection is the challenging our biased assumptions about introverts and getting educated about what makes people tick and those different temperaments, because that bias is so sneaky sometimes. And I wrote about it for you as far as hiring, but in the book we looked at, in introvert-friendly workplaces, 7 different areas, everything from training to, I mentioned, remote work to communication. And that bias, it's not that everybody wants to communicate the way I want to communicate. Or, one quick example in training, like, I've been sharing with groups around virtual training. It's just, so if you hear silence, that doesn't mean that you rev it up and you talk more as the facilitator, right? You think about, well, what are the people I'm not hearing from half the room right now? By the way, that's 40 to 60% typically are introverts. So why are we not using the chat to that, right? So I can start to think about my options and my tools and my techniques, particularly if you're in HR or diversity, inclusion, and equity, if you have already done the thinking and the understanding, right, about what an introvert might or might not look like, and then check it out with your folks. And believe me, people are so appreciative when you do that. They're so appreciative.
Love that we're talking about getting people's voices heard, even if it's not making them the center of a video or making them an Instagram star, because that would be like their worst nightmare in the world. There's chat boxes. That's
right. There's asynchronous communication, right?
Yeah. No, it's so important not to leave their contributions on the table and get them out in front. And, most of us these days, I think it's safe to say we're kind of hating meetings. We're feeling Zoom exhaustion, right? I mean, how can we make sure that we're hearing introverts moving forward? Any other key takeaways?
Sure. And we have tons in the book, but I certainly will highlight a few that came up. And these were from my peeps, the people that I support are the introverts. They'll tell you, first of all, you should ask. A lot of people say, well, I don't know what to do with my introvert. Well, ask the people in your group. You don't have to say, I know you're an introvert, but I've noticed some of you have been a little quieter. How can we get more people involved? I want to hear everybody's ideas. So that's number one, right? To ask people. But, there's a term I heard when I went out to Silicon Valley. I was researching a number of companies out there because, of course, they had some progressive practices. You're not surprised about that. And I was looking for where we could find like pockets of introvert inclusion. And this term kept coming up, and it was good meeting hygiene.
That, to me, by the way, it sounds so dry. I'm like, what is that?
We're so tired of wash your hands for 20 seconds, But
the heck is that?
I know. But really what it is what we learned in meetings 101, agenda, keeping meetings, only having a meeting if you need it, knowing what the roles are, who should be in the room, all of these things. And notice part of that is noticing when introverts are not sharing and being intentional about building in processes that are going to engage people. And for instance, 1-minute sharings. Around the room. Everybody's going to do that. Write down your answer before we speak in the room. We're going to take 2 minutes now. Here's the question. You put it up on the whiteboard, and let's get everybody's responses. And by the way, the extroverts provide better output that way, don't they? One thing I've noticed even in just the last month has been the use of the breakout room to be just even one-on-one conversations. So let's be creative, folks. We've got these tools now, right?
And what's wrong with one-on-one? I love it.
It's the introvert's dream. They would much rather have that. Think about networking, right? And having to walk into a room with all these people. So it's great. And you can go deeper. And that's what introverts really like, because extroverts get frustrated. When I studied introverts and extroverts and what makes genius partnerships where there's equal sharing between them, extroverts are very frustrated when introverts shut down and they don't offer their ideas. And so, but getting to know them one-on-one is really, really key, having that rapport building.
Well, I tell you, time flies when we're having fun. It's crystal ball time already. I can't believe it. Guess what? I have a question to ask you. What are your predictions for the future of work? Where are we going next?
Well, I'm hopeful, Megan. I'm an optimist about all of this. I think it's shaken us up through this last almost year, and I think we've had a chance to look at very many aspects of diversity and inclusion and equity. And this is one. This is an additional one that isn't always obvious. It's under the surface, but I think we're going to be more intentional about our practices, and if we think about HR in particular. particular about really, are we asking that question? Are we including introverts in our planning and in our execution? And I believe that it's going to happen more. And that's when we change cultures. That's when the entire organization change. It's not just a nice to have. The results are pretty scary if we don't hear from, again, between 40 and 60, but from half of our population. So we need to do that. And now we have ways and strategies to make that happen. So I'm very hopeful. And I'm looking forward to having folks and your listeners spread the word about changing cultures.
You got it, Jennifer. Thanks for stopping by.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Just a reminder that you can hear all the Work Trends podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and on the podcast page at talentculture.com. Be sure to subscribe so you can listen on the go and stay up to date on all the latest news you want to hear. I look forward to catching up with you next time. I hope today's information made you wiser, happier, more informed, and most importantly, thinking of how you can use it to improve the quality of your life.